it's kind of weird because I've really become a big fan of Wendy Williams. I really enjoy her show, and I was watching it, um, and she was talking about how one of the problems that she had with the Whitney interview was that she didn't feel like Whitney really owned her addiction. And when I listened to that the first time, I didn't necessarily agree, but one of my friends was like, "Yeah, I don't think that she really owned her addiction either." It was like, "Well, Bobby was my drug. Bobby made me do this. Like I did it for Bobby." But there was never really any ownership there um, on her part. But as I began to think about it a little bit more, it occurred to me that one of the differences between Whitney and Wendy, and this is not no disrespect to either one of the ladies, is that um, Whitney has been over her addiction to cocaine for over 10 years, whereas we don't even know how long Whitney has been over her addiction, but we know it hasn't been 10 years. And so, because of that, um, I think, like there are stages when you're trying to recover from anything. And I thought about like when people get married, like and they get a divorce, and like sometimes when you've been married for a long time, it's hard to find your own identity, and it's hard to separate yourself from that marriage that you were in. And so a lot of times, like during that stage when you first get divorced and you're feeling free, like a lot of the things that the decisions that you made in your life, like you attach those decisions to, like being in a relationship because you had this intimate connection with somebody that you lived with, you thought with, and I think that's the same thing for Whitney. I think that like one of the reasons why Whitney is not going to overtly say, what, I take responsibility for my actions, is because I think that Whitney um, sees her life as this, like Whitney before Bobby, and then Whitney during Bobby, and then Whitney after Bobby. And it is abundantly clear that Whitney before Bobby and Whitney after Bobby seems to have um, her head on straight. It seems to be that she's thinking clearly, and that it's not to say that Bobby is responsible for all the decisions that Whitney made in the years that they were married, but at the same time, that he plays a huge part in the things that she did, and she even talked a lot about wanting to be a good wife and wanting to you know uh, be there for him and support him. And mentally, like, I think that, I could understand what she was saying about, being accustomed to being in charge and then wanting, like to finally relax and somebody else be in control. So she was experiencing that, and all that time she was in so many ways losing herself. So as she was losing herself, she was losing herself to Bobby. And a part of losing herself, they found an addiction together, that as she's trying to, like rebuild her life, when she thinks about her addiction, she quite naturally connects that addiction to Bobby Brown, which I think is okay. Like I think, like when after 10 years, like Whitney Williams, I think you're going to be able to say, here are the things that I take responsibility for. Here are the things that I did to bring this situations upon myself, and I can take ownership of that. But I wouldn't, like be quick to judge Whitney because of that, because I think so many things take time, and I think if you have never had a drug addiction, then it is just so difficult to sit in the seat of judgment like just when thinking about people who have. So, like I watched the interview, like, and it made me feel good to see Wendy rebounding. And I don't need Wendy or Whitney to hit all the notes that she hit a long time ago. My expectations for Whitney are, and I hate to say this, but my expectations for Whitney are really low. with regard to like the music industry and all that kind of stuff. Because to me, like as somebody who supports her as a fan, like I want to see her healthy, I want to see her happy, and I don't want people to sort of pressure her to feel like she has to be somebody that she can't be. And you know, when I say that she can't be it is because Whitney is never going to be the Whitney that she was 10 years ago. And, you know, speaking of 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, like one of the things that's really upsetting me is, you know, like this younger generation of people who didn't know Wendy back then. All they see is what, I keep saying Wendy, you know what I mean, Whitney. They see the Whitney that we see, they hear the Whitney that we hear now, and they think that that's all that Whitney is. And I think that like if you haven't really had the opportunity to see Whitney in her prime, like you're really not in the position to sort of judge, you know, like how far she's come. Like, and that's really hard for me because, you know, like Whitney is the voice, one of the greatest voices of all time, not just our time, all times. And you know, like you just want people to have the utmost respect for her, not because of, you know, just one album that she sold 400,000 copies of, but because of the legacy that she's built and because of the foundation that she's laid for all of these new artists that are out there and that are up and coming and that are building their own legacy. So, you know, I think we can pray for Whitney, we can support her, but we should not judge her. We should, you know, lift her up as much as we can. So, just my little 2 cents.